The following program contains politically irreverent commentary. If you suffer from an exaggerated sense of self-importance, this show might not be right for you. Check with a PhD in PC, ASAP.
Speaking the truth when others hold their tongues. Wrestling for justice with left-wingers and crocodiles. Resisting the temptation to keep the peace at any price. The only talk show host who writes his own theme music, Randall Terry.
Welcome! Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, I hate it when I'm falsely accused. I love you. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. Today's top stories: Geert Wilder's of the Netherlands, the new hate speech hero for the world. And we have invited Imam Rauf to join us in New York City, Wednesday, October 6th. And we have invited Executive Director of CARE, Nahid Awad, to join us in Washington, D.C. on October the 7th. Today's program brought to you in part by the Netherlands. We make great cheese, but we're not so good at defending free speech. And by Geert Wilder's, a new hero for religious and free speech freedoms. Netherlands, you don't deserve him. I'll be right back after a quick word from my friend, Sir Reginald Bling.
Just turn the thing on. I got something to say. Can you imagine someone coming up to John the Baptist saying, "John, don't preach against Herod. You're going to lose your tax-exempt status." But we would not have the gospel. Or someone coming up to the clergy in England saying, "Don't preach against King John." But we would not have the Magna Carta. Or people coming up to American preachers saying, "Don't preach against King George III." What? We would not have an America. These lily-livered, panty-waist, so-called preachers in America who are groveling at the feet of Caesar. You know what they're like? They're like the preachers in England. Yeah, the ones that bowed down to Henry VIII and became the Church of England. Hey, if you got a brain, you ain't cut a deal with Caesar. You cut a deal with the devil.
Welcome, friend, to the program. Today is going to be a little bit fun, a little bit paced, and a lot of content, because this week we are embarking on some very, very serious efforts in New York City and Washington, D.C. And this morning, press releases were sent out in Arabic and Hebrew to over 10 nations in the Middle East, directly addressing Islamic political and religious leaders. In a moment, I will read to you the main excerpts from that press release. But first, let's go to today's top story for this show. Geert Wilders. He is a member of the Dutch Parliament, and right now is probably the most famous and probably the most beloved and hated politician in the Netherlands. He is standing trial. The trial is in progress right now for hate speech under the laws of the Netherlands. Hate speech such as calling or comparing the Quran to Mein Kampf, or saying that Islam is like Nazism.
Nazism? We haven't heard that kind of courage and honesty from a politician since you know who? Since Winston Churchill himself. Winston, do you like him?
Winston does like him because he has the courage to call it like he sees it. Let me give you some of his remarks because they're just so good. In one speech, he said this, and I quote, "The Islamization of Europe continues all the time, but the West has no strategy for dealing with the Islamic ideology because our elites say that we must adapt to them rather than the other way around." He also, when he was in New York City on September 11th, gave a phenomenal speech at Ground Zero. I urge you to Google the speech and read it. He quoted Abraham Lincoln, who said, "Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves." He said that if you do not put limits on tolerance, it becomes suicidal. He said words in the streets of New York City that had more clarity, more courage, and more truth than any words that I have heard emanating from an American politician, whether in our administration under President Obama or in either party, in either house, the U.S. House or the Senate. Well, his clarity is not coming without a price to him. As I said, he is standing trial right now for so-called hate speech because he compared the Quran to Mein Kampf, which was the book written by Adolf Hitler when Hitler was a prisoner. It was basically Hitler's blueprint for the takeover of Germany. Now, I'm going to say something here that is going to distress a few people, but most of you are going to get it. Winston Churchill, who is one of my greatest heroes, and in my opinion was the towering man of the last century. He, Ronald Reagan, and John Paul II were the three towering figures politically. Mother Teresa, as far as, and Billy Graham as far as religion. Anyway, Winston Churchill did something that other English politicians refused to do. You ready? He read Mein Kampf. He read it. You see, Hitler told everyone what he intended to do. He wrote a book while he was in prison that outlined his agenda. Other British politicians just wouldn't take the time to read it. And so they didn't understand the threat, and they mocked Churchill when Churchill said there was a threat. Churchill regularly made speeches against Nazism and against Hitler at a time when Hitler was getting the Man of the Year award from Time magazine, at a time when Germany was the largest trading partner with Great Britain. Yeah. Churchill was giving speeches that agitated people so much that his so-called friends and his adversaries in Parliament said that he was a warmonger, that he was a fearmonger, that he hated the Germans, had a phobia of the Germans. They just would not stop accusing him because of his remarks about Germany and the threat that Hitler and the Nazis posed not only to England, but to all of Europe. As I said, Churchill read Mein Kampf. The other English politicians didn't. And guess what? Churchill was right. And so the problem we're facing today is this. Our politicians, our leaders, both spiritual, religious, and political, simply don't read the Quran. And they certainly don't read Islamic history. They don't read the Hadith, the words and the deeds, the Sunnah of Muhammad that are not in the Quran. And so they don't have a clue what they're dealing with. They're starting with a faulty premise that all people are basically good and that all religions are peaceful and we all want to get along and that Islam has somehow been hijacked by a few radicals. Well, the Quran, the Hadith, the Sunnah, if they were simply read and studied by our leaders, would teach them something else. And Geert Wilder has the guts to dig for the truth, learn the truth, and then proclaim the truth. Come hell or high water, come what may from his political assailants and his press critics, he is living out the truth. We have a great lesson to learn from him and a deep gratitude, a deep debt of gratitude owed to him. Let's learn from the lesson he's giving us, and let's hope he's found not guilty very quickly. When I come back from this break, we've got a song for you today, Do You Know Your Amendments? It's a lot of fun. And we're going to read to you from the press release that went out all over the Middle East to literally hundreds of news outlets in Arabic and about 100 news outlets in Hebrew, over 600 total. We'll tell you what we said. I'll be right back.
People who say they're atheists are really stupid. If they live their life by that principle, they leave no room for error.
Moments with Moses. The Lord will make the pestilence cleave to you until he has consumed you off the land which you are entering to take possession of it.
Hi, friend. Welcome back to the program. We've sent out a press release to literally over 1,000 media outlets in New York City and across the Arabic world, inviting the Imam of New York City, Ground Zero Mosque, the Cordoba House, and inviting the Executive Director of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations here in Washington, D.C., to join us in making a statement, in signing a statement. They say that they are moderate Muslims and that they don't represent those people who commit acts of violence. You may or may not know, but myself and members of my team have been threatened with death or with other punishment from various clerics in Iran and Egypt and perhaps elsewhere around the world. So we're inviting these two moderates to sign the following statement to let people know that they believe this. And I quote, "We, American Muslims, denounce the calls for violence against those who burn, tear, or otherwise desecrate Qurans. And we call on Muslim imams, muftis, ayatollahs, and political leaders in Muslim nations throughout the world to cease persecuting Christians, Jews, and others who proclaim their faiths and thereby differ with Muhammad, Islam, and Sharia law." If they really mean what they say, then they could stand by that statement. And we invite them to do so. I, in another part of the press release, sent out a request to political and religious leaders in the Islamic world. This is what I said to them personally. We invite you, the Islamic political and religious leaders of Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan, Egypt, Jordan, Yemen, Syria, and other Islamic nations, to cease imposing Sharia law on your citizens. Be men of honor and courage. Lay down the sword of Muhammad and respect the right of all peoples in your realms to publicly practice their religion as defined in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, for those of you who don't know what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says, specifically about freedom of religion and freedom of speech, let me read them to you. Article 18 says, "Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance." Article 19 is even more on point. "Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference, and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers." Think about it. In any Islamic country in the world today that is governed by Sharia law, Christians, Jews, and other religions are simply not permitted these fundamental human rights. Our premise is simply this: if Islam is a peaceful religion, then political and religious leaders lay down the sword. If Imam Rauf and Executive Director Awad are moderate Muslims, then join us in defending these human rights in America and across the world. Let there be an even playing field, without fear, without oppression, without the coercion of law, without someone looking over their shoulder wondering if they're going to be put in prison or maybe even beheaded. It is my conviction that if the sword of Islam is laid down, then people can begin to practice real freedom and do what they want with their religion. And then let's all just see what happens. I'll be right back with that song I told you about.
It's just not art, it's a philosophical statement that the Ten Commandments are the foundation of justice and law. Now I know that there's probably some older, lecherous men here.
A nation without a conscience is a nation without a soul. A nation without a soul is a nation that cannot live. Sir Winston Churchill. Welcome back to the program, friend. If you are interested in what we're doing in New York City and in Washington, D.C., go to terrycast.com, click on Hear Mohammed Speak. And you know what? Get on our email list because we'll bring you up to speed on stuff that we don't talk about in the show. Now, that song I promised to you, do you know your amendments? Friend, we do it right because we do it twice. The 14th Amendment is so we can kill babies. The First Amendment is for gay marriage, and the Second Amendment is freedom from religion. What a great Bill of Rights we have. The Third Amendment gives us free health care. The Fourth Amendment bails out the banks. The Fifth Amendment gives the FBI power. What a great Bill of Rights we have. Do you know your amendments? Do you know what makes this country great? George Washington, Tommy Jefferson, they fought so we could all be slaves. The Sixth Amendment is the right to a new house. The Seventh Amendment is cash for clunkers, and the Eighth Amendment is the dollar for the euro. What a great Bill of Rights we have. The Ninth Amendment is the right to free college. The 10th Amendment tells the states, shut up, sit down. The 11th Amendment guarantees diversity. A great Bill of Rights we have. Do you know your amendments? Do you know what makes this country great? George Washington, Tommy Jefferson, they fought so we could all be slaves. The 12th Amendment is tolerance for Islam. The 13th Amendment is for bad luck. And the 14th Amendment is so we can kill babies. What a great Bill of Rights we have. I love this country. Thank you. You're very kind. You know, think about it. If Americans don't know the amendments of their own constitution, how could they possibly know anything about Sharia law and the Quran? Let's wake up, my friends. Let's wake up and need some Lucky Charms. All right, I got to take a break. I'll be right back. The Lord is at your right hand. He will shatter kings on the day of his wrath. Samuel Adams said, "Shame on men who can court exemption from present trouble and expense at the price of their own posterity's liberty." One of the great horrifying lessons of the 1930s is that World War II was a war that did not need to be fought. If the British and the French had simply done their job according to the Versailles Treaty, if they had simply not allowed Germany to rearm to the teeth, World War II would have never happened. In fact, there were actually 2 instances in which there were plots from the German generals to arrest Hitler before the war even started, if the British and the French so much as lifted a finger. Well, we're making some of the same mistakes today because, like Samuel Adams said, we're trying to not have trouble and expense, but it could be our children that pay the price. I, for one, am not willing to allow my children to suffer because of my cowardice and treachery. Talk to you soon.
This court has become a fountain of debauchery and injustice, of bloodshed